I've got my drawer material milled to size here. I've got a front and a back. I've got two sides. You'll need to size your material to fit the 7/8 inch spacing on a dovetail jig. So I've got mine at 3.5 inches. First thing I'm going to do is I've laid out my parts on the bench here, and I'm going to mark each corner with the same number. And the reason I want to do this is each piece is going to stay together all through the process of cutting into assembly. So when I'm machining these, they need to go into the dovetail machine a certain way, and this way I can keep track of them. I'm also going to mark an X on top of each part as well. This is also for me to keep track of how they go into the jig. So now that we've got our parts marked, let's head on over to the jig and we'll get started cutting. Okay, so I've got a kind of a mock-up in here, and I use scrap pieces, and obviously one thing about jigs is you're going to need plenty of scrap material. So when you're milling your material for your drawers, always mill a little extra because you're no doubt going to need to set something up. Unless you've got a dedicated router, there's always going to be adjustments to be made. Just to kind of brief go through this dovetail jig, I've got down here is where I cut. These are my tails. In this case, with the 3.5 inch width piece, I've got enough to be able to cut 4 tails. That piece gets locked in down below, and it actually rests on the underside of that template. And this template, which is where your guide bushing rides, goes in and out, cutting your pins and your sockets at the same time. Now this is going to be your socket board, which is also going to be your front and back of your drawer. It gets locked in right on top here, and it butts up right against the back side of your tails. And a couple other features on this dovetail jig. You've got an adjustment down below here and one on top, and this adjusts your pieces back and forth so you can get your dovetails just lined up just perfect. All jigs come with instruction guides, and they're usually pretty clear, so I make sure you read that and understand how to set your jig up. Okay, so when you're getting ready to route, you want to make sure your bottom of your router is firmly on top of that template. Don't want to lift it up. I always also like to try to keep my router in the same orientation as it's going through. Don't twist it around like that, because that guide bushing may not be perfectly round, and it's just good practice to go in and out. Follow those teeth all the way around, making smooth, clean cuts. Now we're ready to start cutting some parts. I'm going to start with number 4. I've got my X's on the top sides. Remember, those go to the outside. I'm going to lock my tailboard in first, which is my drawer side, and then I'm going to slide in my drawer front or back into the top and lock it in place. I'm going to check to make sure they're firmly locked in place, and we're ready to route. Okay, I've got my pins cut. Looks like they're in good shape. And my sockets cut. These go together just like that. So now I got my first corner cut. All right, so move on to the second one. I'm just going to stay with the same piece, the front or back, and I'm going to slide it in. I'm going to put it in the top here. I'm going to look for the number 1. I've got it here, X to the outside. And this is the tail board. It goes in first. Again, tied against the template. Make sure you get the dust cleared out in there. And this one's tied against my stops over here and tied against the back of the drawer side. Okay, so we're ready to cut this one. Okay, I'm going to just keep this piece in my hand. I got number 2. I got my X on the top. I'm going to flip it over so X is going out. Again, tight against the top or bottom side of the template. Okay, that piece is done. I've got my socket set on both sides. Find my number 2. X goes to the outside. Position it, lock it down good. Okay, so we've got our drawer parts cut, dovetails are cut. I got one last thing to do on these drawers, and that's to cut a groove for the drawer bottom. So we're going to do that over on the table saw, and I'll show you how to do that. I'm just going to set up here where I've got my 1/8" blade in, and I'm going to make 2 passes with that just to match up for my 1/4" plywood. I've got my blade raised up 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch groove, and I've also positioned my fence away from the blade so I'm cutting just a little off center in that last socket, as you can kind of see there. I'm going to make 1 pass of all 4 pieces, and I'm going to come back, adjust my fence over so it fits the plywood bottom. Okay, now that I've got my first cut made, I'm going to slightly adjust my fence over. Now I'm going to use my scrap piece here and adjust that cut so my plywood bottom fits before I cut the rest of my pieces. So I'm just going to move it over just not quite 1/8 inch. I'll make my first pass, and if I have to move it again, I can move it again. Okay, so obviously I need to move it over a little bit more, still a little narrow. Okay, I've got a really good fit there. Now I'm ready to cut the rest of my drawer parts. Got my drawer parts all machined, got them all laid out here. The next step is to dry fit. Make sure everything goes together as you plan it to do without the glue first. So just going to start by assembling front and back onto one side. And I'm using a soft rubber mallet to put these parts together. You don't want to mar anything. I'm going to put my bottom in place there. Again, I'm matching up my numbers, corresponding joints. Okay, final side. Okay, great. Nice tight joints, it's exactly what you want. Okay, I think we're ready for some glue. So we'll just kind of tap this apart. I also like to sand my drawer bottoms at this time. I've done that, because you're not really going to have an opportunity to do it after that. I also like to sand the insides of my drawers so I can kind of remove some of these numbers. Okay, so you notice when I was sanding these parts, I kept them in the same orientation that they were numbered in, because now I've obviously removed the numbers. I still need to get them back in the same way they came apart. So just keep that in mind when you're sanding your drawers as you go. All right, so we're ready to add some glue. And I'm just using regular old yellow carpenter's glue. And I'm just going to apply a little bit of a little drop in each one of those sockets. You don't have to use a whole lot of glue. Also, I'm going to do a little acid brush here. And I just kind of spin it around in there and make sure it's good and coated inside that socket. I'm only going to apply glue to the socket pieces and not the pins. Go ahead and do both front and back. Okay, and since I am using plywood drawer bottom, not solid wood, I like to put a little glue in the grooves of the drawer. It keeps that bottom from not rattling around, adds a little more strength to your drawer. You see I'm kind of putting the glue on the bottom side of that groove too, so if I get any squeeze out, it's going to happen on the bottom side hopefully and not inside my drawer. Okay, same way we dry fit it, I'm going to assemble it right back the same way again. Okay, let's get this side, looking good. Okay, at this point, the drawer is pretty much done. You know, if your joints go together nice and tight, there's really no need to clamp because those dovetails, if they're seated in there, your drawer is pretty much going to be where it is. You can check for square at this point too. To be honest with you, if you haven't machined your parts properly, it's probably not going to make much of a difference. I just let these sit on a flat surface, let them dry, and then we'll move on to sanding and finishing these as well. I've got my drawer glues all dry on the joints, and you know, one thing about dovetails and a lot of joinery, to be honest with you, even though I've got a precision jig, a setup over here that I had dialed in right on the money, you know, sometimes you still end up with some hairline cracks in the joints. Also, sometimes you get a little tear out, even though you're using a backer board. You get these little cracks in your joinery. I've got a little trick that works pretty slick for this to cover that right up. And I simply just take a little bit of carpenter's glue and I just kind of apply it right over the top and rub my finger and kind of rub it down in those little cracks. Don't need a lot, just a little bit. I'm going to cover up all those cracks like that, okay? And then I'm going to come back with my sander. And sand right over that. That sawdust, that glue mixes in there, fills those cracks up really nice. You get a nice looking joint.